Hello, friends. My name is Paul Campbell, and I serve as music director at St. Thomas More Ordinariate Parish in Scranton, Pennsylvania. Recently, I was asked to give two presentations at the first ever Ordinariate Musicians Conference held at our Cathedral and Chancery in Houston, Texas. And after the fact, I decided to make some recordings of these presentations to make them permanently available to Ordinariate musician colleagues who indeed showed a good bit of interest in these topics. The other video, which I've already produced, is on the minor propers and Mass settings available to Ordinariate musicians for our Mass. And this presentation, as you can see, focuses on scheduling congregational hymns and choral anthems in accordance with the lectionary readings. Before moving on to that topic, it's important to mention a couple of features of our music ministry here at St. Thomas More Parish that have implications for today's discussion. As you might guess, largely what I'm able to do in this presentation is tell you what we do here at St. Thomas More in terms of selecting our hymns and anthems, and hopefully you can make use of that information in your own settings. So since I'm largely giving an account of what we do here at our parish, it'll be important to understand a couple of features of our parish from which yours might differ, which might suggest some adjustments in your own case. First is that here at St. Thomas More, we do not have and never have had a pew hymnal. You might be working within the confines of a particular bound hymnal that you have in your pews for your worship, most particularly the hymnal 1940, or perhaps some of you the hymnal 1982. When I arrived here at St. Thomas More, we had a few tattered copies of the hymnal 1940, but rather than pursuing accumulating more of those, we went almost immediately upon my arrival back in 2008 to a comprehensive worship aid with all of the text and scripture and hymns and liturgical music for all Sundays and holy days inside one cover. And this is distributed to the congregation every Sunday and every holy day and any solemnity when we have hymns and the choir and music and so forth. Just to get a glimpse at this resource, at the time, Epiphany had been a recent Sunday, so we can open this document and we'll just quickly scroll through it. So we have our cover, we have inside the cover a welcome and information page, and then we have our organ prelude, our first hymn, introit, onto the Kyrie and Gloria of the Mass. So there you see our unison congregational Mass setting. The Collect of the Day, the first lesson. We do chant the Psalm on Sundays and solemnities and holy days at St. Thomas More rather than the gradual. So you see the Psalm here. The second lesson, our Alleluia and verse. The Gospel. The only peculiar item in this particular example, of having been on Epiphany, was the proclamation of the date of Easter and of the movable feast, which is traditionally chanted at this moment in the Mass on Epiphany. We do say our creed at St. Thomas More. We do not sing one, so you see that there. And we unerringly sing the prayers of the people, Form 3, and so we provide the music for the responses here. On to the penitential rite, the offertory antiphon, and then here at the offertory is when our choir will sing a choral anthem every week during the choir season. On to the Sursum Corda, the Sanctus, the canon of the Mass, the Lord's Prayer, the Peace, the Fraction, the Agnus Dei from our particular Mass setting on that day, prayer of humble access, the Holy Communion, after which we do have a hymn. So we have an opening hymn, we have a hymn Immediately after the last person has received communion, Father Bergman prefers that we do not sing a hymn as communion is being received. Our prayer of thanksgiving and post-communion prayer, and of course, a final hymn as well, prayer to St. Michael, and then our organ postlude. So that's just a glimpse at this resource. My point being that this is the world I live in which I'm able to select hymns which are outside the covers of any particular volume. Of course, we have to be careful to get the theology right and make sure that the music serves the ordinariate liturgy appropriately. But I'm not confined to a particular hymnal. And frankly, I do commend this practice to you of having this comprehensive worship aid for your principal masses. Not only will it enable you to select hymns from outside the particular volume which you use, which is kind of a secondary effect, but in particular, it ends all the book juggling that both your present congregation, but more importantly, visitors and potential members will have when they come to your Mass. So if you have a pew missalette, a hymnal, a leaflet with the readings and psalm, a Bible if they want to turn to the and follow the scriptures as they're read. If you have all these different resources and are required to switch among them, it becomes very heavy workload. So this is a much more user-friendly way to take both your present and your potential members through the Mass, and it will also enable you to select hymns from outside your particular accustomed volume. Secondly, it's important to know that Father Bergman preaches almost exclusively from the Gospel here at St. Thomas More. That's not to say that the other readings get no mention, they certainly do, but the focal point is certainly the Gospel. It used to be that I would scatter the selection of hymns among the various readings. So I might pick the opening processional hymn in accordance with the Old Testament lesson, and then I might pick the communion hymn from the epistle or the closing processional hymn from the gospel, kind of distribute them across the Mass. But I found that this just did not always give a lot of focus to the thematic content of the Mass. And given that Father Bergman preaches primarily from the gospel text, for quite some time now, I've been choosing all three hymns and the anthem, or in the summertime, when it's not the choir season, we don't have a choral anthem during the summer, we have an offertory hymn. All four hymns will be chosen according to the gospel text, if I can help it. If there's that many hymns available on the gospel text, it's the gospel which drives my selection of all four hymns. And with the hymns and the preaching, I find that this packs a fairly strong punch thematically rather than scattering the selection of the hymns across the various different readings in the Mass. Some of them, of course, are related. The gospel tends to be related to the Old Testament lesson. The epistle may or may not be, and tends to be sequential from within a certain epistle book for some weeks in a row. The psalm may or may not seem to be based more closely on the readings than not. But by basing them all on one particular reading, on the gospel, upon which Father Bergman typically focuses, we do get a fairly strong thematic focus. If your pastor does differently and tries to approach the different readings more equally throughout his preaching, or if, say, he's doing a sermon series on the particular epistle book that you're working your way through sequentially at a particular time of year, then you'll have to use the tips that you learn in this session to pick hymns, not according to the gospel, but according to the needs of the preaching. And so that's just a matter of taking what you learn here and applying it elsewhere. But you're going to find in our particular case that they are largely based on the gospel text. So I'd like to start by recommending an end goal for you, which will make your life much easier as an ordinary musician. And that is to build for yourself a comprehensive schedule of all the hymns and anthems at your parish for the 3-year lectionary cycle. Many of us, week by week, we're sort of scrambling to consider the lectionary texts and come up with, well, what are my hymns going to be this week? Or if we're planning a little further out for our choirs, what will my choral anthems be 6 weeks from now? But if you're able to take the time and gradually build yourself a spreadsheet or a schedule of some kind with all of your hymns and anthems pre-selected for the entire 3-year liturgical cycle, then you won't be constantly trying to reinvent the wheel, picking new hymns every time. So we can look at the version that I've put together here. And here's the spreadsheet that I've put together for St. Thomas More. You see here we have a year column for year A, B, and C, and then these horizontal bars of gray and white are delineating Sundays. So for most Sundays or holy days, we have 4 selections. Advent 1 is a little different because we start with a litany in procession rather than a hymn, but then we have 3 other hymns selected. But most Sundays, when we don't have the litany, you'll see 4 hymns selected. You'll notice that one of them, the second one, tends to have an asterisk in front of it. Here's some more examples. These are offertory hymns, but as you see out here in the right-hand column, these are occasions for which we typically have an offertory anthem sung by the choir. So what I've done is I've pre-selected backup offertory hymns in case there's some reason that the choir would not be singing the anthem that Sunday. Perhaps I've fallen ill and have a substitute who isn't quite up to the task of overseeing a choral anthem, something along those lines. But in general, the plan is always to have our choir sing these anthems at the offertory, and these asterisk hymns that you see inside each Sunday bar are all just backup plans in case we don't have a choral anthem. But generally speaking, we'll have 3 hymns, the opening procession, the communion, and the closing procession, and then an offertory anthem sung by the choir. So this is going to go by fairly quickly, but I'm going to scroll down. You see we started with Advent, Christmas, and the Sundays that follow, Epiphany. Then we leap after baptism of the Lord straight to Ash Wednesday. We're going to come up to those other Epiphany Sundays when we got what I've labeled as ordinary time down below. Then into Lent, then Holy Week, Eastertide, Pentecost, Trinity, Corpus Christi, and Sacred Heart. And then there's always a final Sunday before pre-Lent, which I always add there at the end to ensure that we sing the Alleluia Dulce Carmen and bid farewell to the Alleluia before Lent begins. But then the remainder of year A, we begin sequentially second Sunday in ordinary time, third Sunday, and so forth. Now these, to start with, will be Sundays after Epiphany. And you can see that on the 9th Sunday of ordinary time is the last time we have an anthem appear for the choir. That's because the 9th Sunday of ordinary time is the latest that those Sundays after Epiphany and pre-Lent are going to go before Ash Wednesday shows up. Okay, so that's the latest we would have an anthem. Then we would begin, as we've already seen, our Lenten Sundays through Holy Week and so forth. And then here at Ordinary 10, you see we no longer have anthems and we lose the asterisks you would normally see. And that's because what we're looking at now is the summertime. We've taken a break out of the ordinary Sundays for Lent, Holy Week, Eastertide, Pentecost, Trinity, etc. And then the summer Sundays resume the count of ordinary time. And so these are 4 hymn Sundays in which we do not typically have a choral anthem. We proceed through the summer. Then we arrive at the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time, or this, of course, in our case, would be a particular Sunday after Trinity. And you see the choral anthems begin to show up again. And you see their asterisks begin to show up again for the backup offertory hymns. And that is because the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time is the earliest I've calculated to begin showing up needing anthems after Labor Day. Now, of course, Labor Day is not much of a liturgical occasion, but our choir and school year all start up immediately after Labor Day. And so the earliest Sunday you're going to have show up after Labor Day for our choir to start singing anthems is the 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time. And so that's when we begin to plan on having choral anthems again. This continues through Christ the King, of course, and then begins Year B, Advent 1, and so forth. Now I'm going to pass the rest of this fairly quickly, still scrolling through Year B. Now you can see we've reached Year C. Go by those even more quickly. Just to show that after all three lectionary years, I also have a category for the solemnities in years A, B, and C. And these are in order of date, starting with Immaculate Conception, then the Presentation of the Lord, Chair of St. Peter. We do have in here some Sundays that are particularly, or not Sundays, but solemnities that are particularly important here. We are St. Thomas More Parish, but we worship in St. Joseph Church, and we've never changed the name to St. Thomas More, so we are St. Thomas More Parish at St. Joseph Church, and so the Solemnity of St. Joseph is important to us. We'll have a big solemn Mass on that day, and possibly a choral anthem or the backup offertory. Same thing with our Solemnity of Title, Saints Thomas More and John Fisher, and so on throughout. The dedication of this church was on August 18th, so our annual celebration of the dedication of St. Joseph Church for our parish. We do have a plan there as well, all the way through to the Chrism Mass. Now, we once were intended to host the Chrism Mass here at St. Thomas More. It turned out to be snowed out, not here in Scranton, but down in Philadelphia, where many flights were coming in. And since then, it's always been down at the Cathedral. So for the time being, at least, the plan of circulating the Chrism Mass among different parishes in the Ordinariate has ceased, but we've still got a plan here just in case it were to resume. So this is the sort of plan that I commend to you, of planning all of your hymns and your anthems as a 3-year cycle in accordance with the lectionary, so that you're not constantly scrambling and reinventing the wheel and trying to decide what your hymns and anthems are going to be in your much more immediate future. So we turn first to the selection of hymns according to the lectionary. And your first resource that I'm going to recommend is you'll have to find the hymnal 1940 with the supplemental liturgical index and collection of service music, which was published in 1961. So if you have any original hymnals 1940 kicking around, those will not have the resources I'm about to show you. You do have to find the 1961 edition, which has a number of helpful resources. As we'll find in a moment, this is available online. You will not have to go buy a physical book if you don't own it already, but this is the version you need to look for. As you see on the right, these resources within this volume begin with a subject index of the general hymns. These are very sort of open-ended and vague, but at least they're there. You'll find in the hymnal 1940 that there's simply one large segment called general hymns, but they're not categorized by topic as you find here. But here we do have a brief categorization of the topics of the general hymns spelled out for us, so you can find some very general topics and look in those page ranges for the topic you're looking for. Much more specific is the topical index that you're going to see on the left. So this is included in this same volume, and you can see a number of topics alphabetized: assurance, brotherhood, burial, example of Christ, Christ as friend, Christ as guide and leader, and so forth. And there's a number of pages where you can find hymns based on more specific topics. On the right, you'll see a liturgical index. The first column, as you see across the top, are hymns for morning prayer, then for evening prayer, and finally for the Holy Communion, which is our main focus today. You see down the left column that these are by day, so for Epiphany 2, Epiphany 3, 4, 5, and so forth. However, it's important to note that, of course, we are no longer on the one-year Book of Common Prayer 1928 lectionary, which this liturgical index would assume. And so, how can you reverse engineer this resource in order to assign these hymns for Sundays in the current 3-year Roman lectionary becomes the question. And there's an important online resource we're going to be able to use later in this talk. So hold that thought, but keep in mind that almost everything we're about to see are for lectionaries other than the 3-year Roman lectionary under which we must now function. So you're going to have to translate from one lectionary to another and pick hymns according to the current lectionary by comparing what the readings were according to these older or other disparate lectionaries we're going to look at. I mentioned earlier that you can find this volume online, so if you go to Google Books and you search the Hymnal 1940 with Supplemental Liturgical Index and Collection of Service Music, you will find almost the entirety of the book is there, including the page range that includes these indexes that we've seen. So you can Google that, Google Book, and look up the sample, and you're going to be able to find those online. Next, we turn to the Hymn Book 1982. Index of scriptural references on pages 1031 through 1039. Now, the Hymn Book 1982, notice it's not the Hymnal 1982. Not everyone is very conscious of this volume, but this is a volume that was released when the Hymnal 1982 was released. And what it includes are the hymns, but not the service music. And because that thins the book out just a bit, what was done instead is to supply all of the harmonized hymns, including those which in the normal Pew edition of the Hymnal 1982 only show the unison tune. And so even for those hymns which recommend unison settings, which would show up only as a unison setting with no organ accompaniment in the Hymnal 1982, the Hymn Book 1982 includes all the hymns harmonized, but without the service music, and perhaps this was issued in hopes that other denominations or individual churches would select this as their primary hymnal without requiring the Episcopal service music section that you would find at the beginning of it. As you can see on the right, we have a sample of the scriptural references. We have them here in scriptural order. So at the upper left, we're picking up at the end of the Gospel of John. Then we continue with Acts, Romans, Colossians, etc. And all that's required to find hymns according to these scriptural references is to know the scriptural references of the lectionary on any given Sunday, which of course you can find online, or you can simply page through your lectionary volume that normally sits on your lectern for the Sunday readings, and then find the equivalent verse range under each book, and look at what hymns are recommended according to those scriptural topics. Next, we have an entire volume which is dedicated to scheduling hymns according to the lectionary. So this is a book that you're able to purchase still on Amazon, still in print, called A Liturgical Index to the Hymnal 1982 by Marion Hatchett, who was the author principally responsible for many of these resources connected to the hymnal 1982. I should say, of course, that if you're using the hymnal 1940, there's no reason to simply assume that you can make no use of any of these volumes that are related to the hymnal 1982. There is, of course, a great deal of overlap between the two. So by looking in these resources that will assign hymns from the hymnal 1982, all you would need to look for would be familiar hymn titles, which you would then be able to draw from the 1940 hymnal and use those. This is a sample pair of pages that I've scanned here. As you can see, these are according to the proper numbering, and you see the dates there. And it's recommending particular hymns for the entrance, the so-called sequence, although in the Catholic Church we just have a few Sundays which use an actual sequence, the offertory, communion, and post-communion or closing hymns. Of course, these are not etched in stone. You can shift them around in whatever way seems appropriate in your own Mass. But nonetheless, you see that hymns are recommended for each Sunday. This happens to be in year A, but all three lectionary years, which are quite closely related to the Roman lectionary, are recommended. You will need to make sure that the lectionary verses are the same or at least quite similar without simply picking hymns unchecked out of this volume, but especially because this is the older BCP 1979 lectionary that's being used, you can be sure that it's quite close to the Roman lectionary with some exceptions that you'll need to be careful about. These sample scans are from the same volume, and that's just to show on the left, first of all, that there are saints' days and feast days which are present in that book for which particular hymns are recommended. Here we see St. John, Apostle and Evangelist. We have the Holy Innocents, and so forth. So it's quite helpful in terms of selecting hymns for saints' days. And on the right, we have a sample scan from lesser feasts and fasts. Now, these, of course, are not going to align anywhere near closely with the Roman lectionary because you have all sorts of Anglican saints, as it were. For instance, January 23rd, Phillips Brooks, and others that you're going to find here. Absalom Jones, priest, there on February 13th. However, there are certainly other saints of the ancient historic church which are listed and for which this will be helpful in order for you to assign hymns on those occasions as well. Next, we arrive at another dedicated volume to this topic called A Scriptural Index to the Hymnal 1982, also by Marion Hatchett. And these are not liturgical references, as the former volume was, but scriptural references, more similar to those scriptural references we found in the Hymn Book 1982. This is a volume which you can see is sort of in landscape orientation and opens up quite wide to look like this. You see it's spiral bound down the middle. We happen to be picking up here in the book of Isaiah, as you see at the lower left. And then you have the chapter and verse citations down in that left column. So these are all Isaiah passages. And right next to that are the number and the title of the hymn that are being recommended as being related to the Isaiah passages in the first column. You can see here that then we have daily office year 1 and year 2, occasions when these Isaiah passages show up in the daily office lectionary, but again, this is the Book of Common Prayer 1979 daily office lectionary, not likely bearing much resemblance to the one we have now in Divine Worship, the Daily Office book. But then we do have Lectionary years A, B, and C. This is the Eucharistic Lectionary, which are going to be quite more closely related to the Roman Lectionary, and you're able to assign hymns for those occasions. But again, these right-hand page columns are not particularly needed if you know the scriptural references for a particular day in the lectionary, and all you need to do there is to page through the lectionary book to that Sunday. Then you can solely use the scriptural references down that left column in order to assign hymns related to those readings. You can, of course, look in other Anglican hymnals. In this case, this is the New English Hymnal, and we have a sample scan which says hymns suggested for Sundays, and you can see that we pick up with Easter 6, Rogation Sunday, Ascension Day, Easter 7, Whit Sunday or Pentecost, and so forth. Now, this again assumes a one-year lectionary in which you're going to find that your Sundays after Pentecost are Trinity or Ordinary Time. We're on a 3-year cycle. This book assumes, I presume, a 1-year cycle in the Church of England. And so there's going to be certainly some disparate information on those Sundays. However, keep in mind that on occasions like Ascension Day, Pentecost, Easter, all these major feasts, of course, there's not going to be a need to distinguish between years A, B, and C. These are on very major topics on those occasions, and this should still be helpful, even if in other cases the readings might be quite different. And of course, there are other Catholic hymnals which are getting better. So a prominent example is the St. Michael hymnal. And these two scans are to demonstrate, first of all, at upper left, that there's a liturgical year index. So we have the whole season of Advent set out, then the Immaculate Conception, Our Lady of Guadalupe, Christmas, Holy Family, and so forth. So we have the major seasons of the church year represented. And on the right, there's also a topical index, and you can see topics like light, love, Mary, mercy, patriotic, peace, and so forth, and these will help you find hymns topically as well. Finally, there are other denominational hymnals. Just as an example, here's the United Methodist hymnal, and you can see we have at upper left a topical index. So we have glory, grace, gratitude, etc., and these should help you find hymns. And then likewise a scriptural index at lower right, and you see there the biblical books followed by chapter and verse citations, which will also help you find hymns. Even if they're in your own hymnal, you might find recommendations in another denominational hymnal that'll point you back to a hymn in your own hymnal that you may not have thought of. Or if, like us, you're publishing hymns for your congregation that are outside any one particular hymnal, you can just directly use them, assuming your pastor approves them from a theological standpoint for use in your Catholic parish. Next, we come to some online resources, and these, of course, are virtually limitless. So I just wanted to bring your attention to a few important ones that I've relied on quite a lot in my case. We have a resource called oremus.org, and what you'll find if you search up oremus.org, and it's much bigger than just a hymnal, so you see the extension there on the link, which is /hymnal, and you'll find that the Oremus hymnal was taken down in 2017 by its creator just because it was too difficult to stay on top of the copyright issues. What he's done, though, however, is to keep the lectionary recommendations up, which list the hymns only by title, even if it does not include all the texts of the hymns as it used to. And of course, this is still a very, very helpful resource. So as you can see, we're going to, just as a thought experiment here, go to Lectionary Year C. and open year C, and here you see starting on the first Sunday of Advent. It's a little tricky to see in the dark blue band there, but this is the first Sunday of Advent for lectionary year C, which at this moment it currently is. And you can see broken out by the various assigned readings for lectionary year C, Advent 1, hymns related to those scriptural references. Because this website is a little bit incomplete, you will not always find this nice, neat delineation between the different readings. You might open another Sunday and find just a great big list of hymns, which does not break them out by Old Testament, Psalm, New Testament, and Gospel, but nonetheless, a very helpful resource for picking your hymns. Next, we have a very large online hymn resource that many of you may be aware of called hymnary.org. And as you see in the URL I've published here, you're able to pick a couple of tabs that will allow you to browse by scripture. So we are now going to the book of Genesis. And as you see, I've got my pointer there at chapter 22. I believe that's the chapter in which we find the account of Abraham and Isaac. So we'll click on Genesis 22. And here you see these are hymns 1 through 20 of actually 32 hymns, which are recommended for that particular book of Genesis. Okay, now there might be multiple stories or multiple citations within Genesis 22. And so you'll have to be careful to select the hymn that actually is related to the passage you're looking for. But here you'll find chapter by chapter, verse by verse, recommendations of hymns according to the lectionary readings. And we have an older website called the Cyber Hymnal. As you can see, established 1996, and the design has probably not changed since 1996, as you can see. But as you see in the two columns at the bottom of the page, we do have an option for looking up hymns according to scripture allusions. So we're going to click on scripture allusions. And in that left column, what you'll find first of all is that the books of the Bible are here alphabetized, or as it happens initially, start showing up in numerical order, 1 Chronicles, 1 Corinthians, and so forth, because of the numbers in front of those books. Down at the very bottom, you see Acts and Amos and so forth start to show up with the letter A, but they are not in scriptural order. And so that takes a bit of getting used to, but you can still scroll through that entire list of biblical books alphabetized and look for hymns according first to the book of the Bible, and then as you see on the right, by chapter and verse. So looking at my red pointer there, we're going to click on 1 Timothy. And let's say we're looking for a hymn related to 1 Timothy 15, in which St. Paul says that he is chief among sinners. And here, right at the top in that list, for that particular single chapter and verse of the Bible, we have a hymn called Chief of Sinners. Seems like that might be a good possibility. And here in our lovely 1996 clouded website background, we have a hymn with words by William McColl set to the tune Dix, okay, as with gladness men of old, which we know from Epiphany time. We have a wonderful text which we find we're able to use according to that particular epistle passage. Chief of sinners though I be, Jesus shed his blood for me, died that I might live on high, died that I might never die. As the branches to the vine, I am his and he is mine, and so forth. Then there's a Catholic resource I found called Cantica Nova. As you can see in the tabs on the left, there's a liturgical planning tab. And if you click on that, you'll see what we're showing here on the right. So I've already gone to that page on this website. You see in the far right of the gray bar that we're in year C, so all 3 years are represented. And as I scroll down, I find that in the ordinary form, which is of course the lectionary which we are using, we'll go to Ordinary Time in the Winter. This presentation was first given in January, and so I wanted to find an upcoming hymn for an upcoming Sunday. So Ordinary Time in the Winter, as distinct from the summer. And let's look for a hymn for the second Sunday in Ordinary Time in year C. So you see there's an L column for liturgical musical information, and there's an M column for music. So I'm going to click on the M for music, and here I find a range of hymns for the second Sunday in Ordinary Time, or in our case, the second Sunday after Epiphany in year C, which if you know your lectionary, you'll know is the account of Jesus turning water into wine at the wedding at Cana. So certainly songs of thankfulness and praise right here suggests itself. There's, I think, a couple of verses in that hymn that refer to that incident, but many other options available as well. So here's our comprehensive list of available resources for planning your hymns according to the lectionary. The hymn of 1940, the 1961 edition, the hymn book 1982 with its scriptural reference index, 2 printed volumes by Marion Hatchett of liturgical index to the hymnal 1902, as well as the scriptural index. Then there are broader categories like other Anglican hymnals, other Catholic hymnals, other denominational hymnals, and then the particular online resources that we remarked as being particularly helpful. So let's go to a hypothetical scenario in which we have to select a hymn for an upcoming Sunday, or to fill in a blank that we might have in our comprehensive spreadsheet that we're going to try to build. Finding a hymn needed for a particular Sunday. So here's a snippet from my spreadsheet. This is the 22nd Sunday in Ordinary Time in year A. The gospel theme, as I've very briefly summarized it on that Sunday, is to take up the cross and follow. And as you can see, we have 3 very suitable hymns already selected, but we've got another blank we need to fill. And so those hymns are At the Name of Jesus, Take Up Thy Cross, the Savior Said, and Lift High the Cross, all suitable for that text, but we want a 4th one. And we find that our present hymnal doesn't have one that is particularly focused on that passage. So I'm first going to use the lectionary book right off the lectern or the internet to locate the scriptural citation on that Sunday for the gospel, which is, in this case happens to be Matthew 16, verses 21 through 27. In this case, I'm going to use the hymnary website. So I'm going to go to the tabs there that allow me to browse by scripture. And I'm going to scroll down. This one is in scriptural order, as you see, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, etc. And I'll scroll down to the Gospel of Matthew, chapter 16, where I'm going to click on the chapter number. First up, you see that we already have a hymn. We've already planned the first recommended hymn, Take Up Your Cross, the Savior Said. Next recommended is Onward Christian Soldiers. Now, however, notice that the gospel citation there is Matthew 16:18, but our scriptural citation for this lectionary Sunday does not include verse 18. It's Matthew 16, verses 21 through 27. So we should not select that hymn because it falls outside the range of the particular Sunday on which we're trying to find a hymn. But in the third case, I have what sounds like a very promising hymn, Jesus, I my cross have taken. So a very closely related title to the topic we're looking for. As you see in the right column, these hymns are ordered in priority according to the number of hits they get as matching up with these scriptural verses. And so this is the most popular hymn we can find that's based on that particular passage. I select that hymn, and when I go to it, though, I discover the text is a strong possibility, but in this case, it's set to an unfamiliar tune by LSD. The author of the text is Henry Francis Lyte, author also of Praise My Soul, the King of Heaven, for example, and probably some others that we would recognize. So we can be fairly certain of the orthodoxy of the text, but we in our congregation are unfamiliar with this tune. So what to do next? Well, I scroll down a little further on the same web page related to this hymn, and I find that while LSD is the most common tune to which it is set, there are other tunes to which this hymn is set, and so perhaps I can find one with which we are familiar. I'm going to scroll further down, and we get many page scans from many different hymnals, and lo and behold, I see there at the very bottom a familiar tune. Jesus, I my cross have taken, all to leave and follow thee. Excuse my voice, I've got a bit of a cold. But this, of course, is what most of us know as Hyfrydal, what one tenor in a prior choir of mine used to call hydrofoil, but which apparently the Welsh is pronounced Hyfrydal. But whatever you want to call it, it's a very familiar tune. Of course, Alleluia, Sing to Jesus, or Love Divine, All Loves Excelling, and it's suitable and has some provenance for having been set to this text. And so we will assign that text to that tune. We will engrave the hymn to that tune in preparation for using it for our weekly worship aid. And there it is. Next, we're going to move to the question of choral anthems. I should say, of course, that choral anthems are going to have to be selected according to the abilities of your choir. There are certainly ordinariate parishes that have multiple professional singers, perhaps mixed with semi-professional and volunteer singers that are capable of quite spectacular cathedral level music. And we have others, probably more numerous cases in which that's not the case. And so everything I'm about to say presumes that you have some familiarity with choral music that is well suited to your own choir's particular situation. First of all, when selecting choral anthems, don't overlook your hymn planning resources to aid you in scheduling anthems. So let's just take a look at what I mean here. What I find if I alphabetize the hymn titles in my hymn spreadsheet is that we have the hymn, Let All Mortal Flesh Keep Silence, recommended a number of times. A couple of times we use them for certain, where you see there's no asterisk, and other times either they are supplemental hymns that we use in the summer instead of a choral anthem, or we have them as a backup plan in case we aren't going to sing an anthem that Sunday. In any event, I'm aware that there are several different anthems which are also on this particular text. There on the left, we have Edward Barstow's anthem, which is not based on the tune Picardy, which is the tune for this hymn, which is a freely composed a cappella piece by Barstow. Then we have two others that are arrangements of the tune Picardy. There's Holst in the middle, and on the right we have an arrangement by Roger Price, which is the one we sing here at St. Thomas More Parish. So if you have already planned hymns for which they use the same title or text as a given anthem, you're able to pull that hymn back out of that Mass and use a choral anthem there instead, and be assured that it will be well related to the lectionary for the day. Next, we have a resource called the Choral Public Domain Library, or CPDL. This is an enormous collection of free online scores that have been posted by various composers, arrangers, engravers, musicians over the years. As you can see here in the center of the page, highlighted in red, at the time that I gave this presentation, it says the Choral Public Domain Library currently hosts free scores of at least 51,338 choral and vocal works. So many free scores available to you to simply print out in the public domain from this website. But as you can see also on the right, where my red arrow is pointing, one of your options for selecting music is categorized by season. So I'm going to click on that link, and let's just see what's available to us on the first Sunday in Lent. So I'm pointing here to Lent 1, where I'm going to click, and then I come up with actually 52 pieces recommended for Lent 1. Now you're going to see a lot of repeat titles, and that's because quite a few of these are actually texts of the minor propers assigned for the first Sunday in Lent. But mixed in with them, in this case, you're going to find other pieces which would be suitable. Let's look at this title, Ductus est Jesus, by Francisco Guerrero, Spanish, I believe, or perhaps Portuguese composer of the Renaissance. I've got pieces posted by a couple of different engravers here, so we're going to go to the PDF link in this first one, and there I'm going to find a score of a 4-part piece of Renaissance polyphony on this text from Matthew 4. Jesus was led by the Spirit into the desert to be tempted by the devil. And of course, the temptation in the wilderness is the gospel reading on the first Sunday in Lent, all 3 lectionary years. So this would be a highly suitable piece for a choir capable of it on that particular Sunday. As you can see, this particular score has some features which may be less than desirable, that make it, less than perfect for all of us. It's got doubled note values, which not all singers can easily translate into the note values they're used to singing. So it's in 4/2 rather than 4/4, which might be a little easier for some to read. Also, there's no keyboard reduction. So you're going to find on the Choral Public Domain Library, these are individual musicians, engravers, conductors who have done these engravings just for their own use in their own choirs, whatever their abilities might be. And almost as an afterthought, they're posting them to the CPDL for whoever else wants to use them. But evidently, this particular engraver didn't have a need for the piano reduction, and so you don't get one. You might find other editions that do. It's just sort of luck of the draw. Next, we have a resource called A Catalog of Anthems and Motets by William Wunsch. I'm presuming that's the pronunciation. This is a PDF document, a large one, available only from the Association of Anglican Musicians, or AAM, A-A-M for short. If we go to the AAM website and we go to the Resources tab that you can see that I'm pointing to there, that'll take us to an option to go to the store where we can find documents to purchase. And there we will find a catalog of anthems and motets for $45. And we can add that to the cart and purchase it to it. Now, at the time when I listed this resource, when I gave this presentation, the gentleman who was running the AAM website contacted me and said he'd be happy to offer a 20% discount if you enter AAM as a discount code when ordering. I'm unsure at this time whether that has now been revoked now that the Ordinariate Musicians Conference is over, but you might try it and you might find you're able to get a 20% discount in purchasing this volume. It will be sent to you by email as a large PDF. As you can see at the top, there are lectionary year A, B, and C for BCP, or Book of Common Prayer, by which is certainly meant the Book of Common Prayer 1979. But further down, we have kind of a revamp of this volume, which includes BCP, LFM, and that's the Roman Catholic Lectionary for Mass, and the RCL, or the Revised Common Lectionary, which the Episcopal Church has since adopted. So this addendum melds all 3 of those lectionaries together because they are quite similar with each other, and then recommends choral music according to each one. So let's go to lectionary year A, to which I've pointed here. And let's see what's available to us on the first Sunday of Advent. I'm going to click that particular occasion for year A. And here I'm going to get 3.5 pages listing choral music appropriate to the first Sunday of Advent. This is not necessarily typical. Most Sundays you might get, for instance, a page and a half or 2 pages, but still that's quite a few options available to you of choral music. These are listed by composer, after which you have in parentheses the publisher and then the title of the work. At upper left, at the heading of each section, there are 3 different ways in which the lectionary passages are listed. On the right, in bold print, you see Isaiah 2, Psalm 122, Romans 13, etc. You have the Revised Common Lectionary citations, and this is a lectionary resource that's now used by most of the mainline Protestant denominations, including the Episcopal Church. On the left, not in bold, we have the same citations, and that's for the Book of Common Prayer, 1979. You can certainly see there are plenty of similarities between them. Finally, we have parenthetical insertions in that list on the left, and these are the places where the Roman Lectionary for Mass differ from either of those 2 volumes. But in any case, all 3 lectionaries are represented, and all of these anthem and motet recommendations are suitable for lectionary year A, Advent 1. Next, we have a resource called St. James Music Press. This is a section of our spreadsheet from St. Thomas More listing our hymns and anthems, which I recommended to you as a goal. And out on the right, you can see by all of our anthems that St. James Music Press is almost universally the publisher of all the choral music that we sing here. Okay, there's a couple reasons for that, but it's very well composed, sturdy music that you'll find can serve you well, even if you don't use it quite so universally as we do. This is the home page. As you can see, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek there. Their motto at the bottom, we're good, we're cheap, and we're snooty. All very Episcopalian. And the deal is that this is an annual subscription for $159, by which you are able to print everything off this website to your heart's content. It used to be that St. James Music Press a few times a year would send out a hard copy, a spiral-bound book of original anthems from which you could photocopy to your heart's content. Now, of course, everything has gone online, and it's a $159 at this date subscription, and it's very much worth it if you're going to be doing quite a bit of copying of this volume or from this website for your choir. As you can see, it has an option for selecting according to season, where I've pointed here, and that will bring up the list on the right of all the seasons and feast days from which we're able to select. So let's go to Ash Wednesday, just see what St. James Music Press has on offer for Ash Wednesday. And here we get just the beginning of what's actually a much longer list than this one. You could scroll on for quite some time and review the Ash Wednesday anthems that are available. But let's go down to the one where I've identified here, God of All Mercy by Carlton T. Russell. It's 2-part mixed, which, as I'll describe in a bit, is very well suited in my particular situation. And I'm going to click on the little preview icon. That will bring up a preview of the music, which, if you're not a subscriber, will be blurred out to make it not worth your while to just grab screenshots of the music. But here you can see the music clearly. And at the bottom of the preview, you have a play button where almost without exception, everything on this website is recorded by someone's parish choir. And you can click that and listen to not always a perfect rendition, but certainly a performance that will give you a very good idea of how it's intended to sound. And at bottom right, you'll see that you can click on the download PDF, assuming you are a subscriber, which will deliver you a clean copy of the music, which then you can photocopy all you want. So you see there appearing on the right. This is the text, as you see at the top, is Cranmer's Collect for Ash Wednesday, which is why it's so appropriate. And if you were to listen to this piece, you'd find it's quite a nice piece for two-part choir, trebles and men on that text would be very suitable for an Ash Wednesday. Also, I just want to point out that if we click on Collections here, we're back at the main menu, you'll see that St. James Music Press publishes quite a few collections of music that's well suited to choirs in fairly modest circumstances. I've put here a couple of title pages from two of those hard copy volumes I told you about that they used to send out for photocopying. The Sunday Morning Absolutely One Rehearsal Anthem book for about 10 panicked singers. Another emergency anthem book for about 10 panicked singers. These were collections of 20 one rehearsal anthems. Okay, fairly simple pieces that nevertheless are very worthwhile. And you can see the titles in the center here where you see all my red arrows. Advent for about 10 panicked singers, Easy Anthems for Summer Choirs, Golden Age Classics for SAB Choir, Scores for Small Ensembles, and finally, Yes, Edith, You May Sing in the tenor section. So all intended for choirs in fairly modest circumstances. In my particular case, St. Thomas More Parish Choir is an intergenerational choir of trebles, teens, and adults, both boys and girls, women and men, and teenagers of both sexes. And because our parish is drawn from 7 different counties on any given Sunday morning, in our case, a midweek rehearsal, in particular for the adults, is kind of a non-starter. It would be very hard for us to have a midweek choir rehearsal. So while our treble choristers and our teens do rehearse in the course of their school day once a week at Maria Calpas Academy, which is our parish hybrid school, and we have somewhat of a choir school relationship with them whereby we can rehearse during the day instead of after school, which is a very nice relationship to have. We do not have a midweek rehearsal for our full choir, including our adults. And so these kinds of anthems tend to suit us very well. So just as to give an example, I'm going to go to Golden Age Classics for SAB Choir. And then in the middle of the page, we'll see what comes up. This again is a partial list. We could scroll quite a bit further into additional titles. You can certainly see the composers column is very well known to Anglican musicians, Thomas Tallis, William Byrd, Orlando Gibbons, just to name the first few. So let's go to the Byrd Ave Verum Corpus, and you can see on the right that this will render us a score for reduced voices, soprano, alto, baritone, of the Byrd Ave Verum. And so if you have a choir that's short on men, or doesn't have any tenors with that nice high soaring range you'd like to have, this will render a possibility for you in order to do something very worthwhile, but just a bit simplified. I should also point out that relying on a source such as the Choral Public Domain Library or St. James Music Press, which was largely designed to enable you to do a lot of photocopying, will enable you to put together for your choir seasonal anthem booklets, which means that you only need to swap out the music in their folders every so often rather than constantly working to update their folders with pulling out the old octavos and putting in the new ones Sunday by Sunday. So this is something I've now accomplished for all 3 years of the lectionary cycle. I'm just giving an example here, happens to be book 11 in our cycle. This is year C, Advent 1 through Baptism of the Lord. And so this is a folded and stapled booklet that's published for our choir here at the parish. And you can see the contents list take us all the way from Advent 1 through Baptism of the Lord, one anthem per Sunday, except for Christmas Eve when we have an entrada to open the Mass, an anthem at the offertory, and a piece during communion. And then the page number where those can be found in this booklet. And so this means that I only need to put one booklet in my choir's folder, starting, say, before the first Sunday in Advent, and that will take us all the way out till after Christmas, at which time it will be time to put in an Epiphany-tide booklet and so forth, and after that Lent, and after that Eastertide and so forth. And this greatly reduces the workload of keeping choir folders up to date. Out on the right, and this is a feature only of the booklet each year that includes our Advent and Christmas music, you'll see I've reordered the table of contents to order the anthems in accordance with the lessons for the Festival of 9 Lessons and Carols. And this allows the choir to sing lessons and carols by paging through those various numbers, not in the same order that they appear in the book, but in the new order out on the right, which takes them through the lessons and carols service as kind of a revamp of all of our Advent and Christmas music. Finally, there are some resources in print rather than online. The first is by James Laster, a catalog of choral music arranged in biblical order. And this is the second edition, which is roughly twice the size of the first edition. This is sort of an embarrassment of riches. This volume will recommend thousands and thousands of pieces according to scriptural citation, and might almost be overwhelming for somebody looking to schedule music according to the lectionary. So it could be that what I've already given you will be plenty. And as you can see on the right, it isn't cheap, $140 for this volume. Here's a sample page, and as you can see, it just goes through in scriptural order each book of the Bible, then chapter and verse citations. Now, 2 Kings, for example, only has a couple of citations, so that may not seem like much, but of course, by the time you get to the Psalms and the Gospels, there's going to be hundreds or thousands of pieces recommended according to the lectionary. And we also have this volume, Choral Literature for Sundays and Seasons by Bradley Ellingboe. This is of Lutheran background, but still following, I believe, the Revised Common Lectionary, which again is itself fairly closely related to the Roman Lectionary for Mass. And so we'll open a sample page here, and this lays them out a little bit differently, where we have the particular Sunday and then all 3 years represented. So year A, year B, and year C. The scripture citations are listed to make sure that indeed you're looking at the same citations you're going to find in the Roman Lectionary. That'll help you weed out any inaccuracies right away. And then we have a number of pieces listed, all of them of pretty decent quality. We see Felice Anerio, Bach, Bairstow, etc. right up there up front. So that should give you some reassurance that there's going to be some good quality pieces recommended in this volume. So here then again are our list of options for selecting choral anthems. First of all, don't neglect your hymn planning resources to find anthems of the same text and title that you could sing on any given Sunday in which you've already assigned the equivalent hymn. There's the Choral Public Domain Library, a catalog of anthems and motets, that volume from the Association of Anglican Musicians by William Wunsch, St. James Music Press, and then these couple of resources in print by James Laster and Bradley Ellingboe. Also, if you're in a situation where you need to make sure that you are keeping your budget within check, don't overlook anthem books as a means of acquiring many anthems at a highly economical cost. These are all booklets or even series of booklets of anthems by which you'll be able to acquire a large number of anthems at a fraction of the cost that all of those octavos would cost you. We have the Morning Star Choir Book series, numbers 1, 2, and 3 from Concordia. The Royal School of Church Music, 12 Easy Anthems. We have again from Concordia the Crown Choir Book series. We have a series from Walton called Sing Joyfully. Then the Oxford Easy Anthem book, the new Oxford Easy Anthem book, and the Oxford Book of Easy Flexible Anthems. Now, virtually all of these that we're looking on the page are intended to be on the simpler side for choirs of more modest resources, but at the same time, very worthy music for you to be singing. And each of these will, in its own right, often contain its own seasonal or topical index. So this is just an example of the Morning Star Choir book from Concordia, the first of that three-part series. When you open to the contents, you'll find a classified index by season or occasion here, which will help you select anthems from that volume. So let's consider another hypothetical. How can I discern when to schedule a particular hymn or anthem? Now, this is actually going in reverse, and I promised you early on that we'd look at a resource available to us which will allow us to sort of reverse engineer the planning of our spreadsheet or our schedule of anthems and hymns according to the lectionary. Let's say I already know what's in my choir library. I already know what's in the covers of my own hymnal. And I'd like to take each of these pieces and schedule it well in advance for the appropriate Sunday in the whole 3-year cycle. How am I going to do that? Well, we're going to first use the internet to discover the biblical source behind the poetic text, if it even is a poetic text. It might just be straight scripture, in which case that's easy enough to find as well. But let's say it's on a poetic text. I'm going to take as an example a lovely piece here, published by St. James Music Press by Roland Martin. And this is a Christina Rossetti poem. And let's look at the text a moment. Consider the lilies of the field, whose bloom is brief. We are as they, like them we fade away, as doth a leaf, and so forth. So, of course, we're going to be able to figure out what that scriptural citation is from. And then we're going to go to this fantastic resource, which is essentially a reverse lectionary. Okay, Scripture Index of Lectionary Readings used for Sundays, solemnities, and major feasts. And this allows us to look up the scriptural reading and to find out when it is scheduled to be read in the 3-year lectionary, not the other way around. We do not have to page to a particular day in the lectionary and learn what scriptures are being read. We can look up the scriptural citation and find out using this resource when it is scheduled to be read in the 3-year lectionary. So, having learned that this consider text is from Matthew 6, verses 24 through 34, I am able to discover that in year A, that passage will be read on the 8th Sunday in ordinary time. And so that is when I will schedule the anthem Consider by Roland Martin, text by Christina Rossetti. We can also schedule by topic using the spreadsheet. Remember, in the spreadsheet, we've put a column of the basic topic of each of those gospel readings. So let's look at an anthem here, Anthem of Healing, which quite obviously is on the topic of healing. O Son of God in Galilee, you made the deaf to hear, the mute to speak, the blind to see. O blessed Lord, be near, and so forth. Quite a haunting anthem, this one. Here's our spreadsheet, and as you can see, we've put a gospel theme on each Sunday. So the theme for that gospel, and here I've alphabetized that column, and I've come up with all kinds of healing Sundays. Starting with year B, ordinary 6, we've got healing of a leper, healing of 10 lepers, healing of Simon's mother-in-law, healing the blind, healing the centurion's slave, And that's only the first column. We go on to the next column, we've got many more healings. And so any of these Sundays, as you can see delineated in the white and gray bands, would be very appropriate for scheduling that particular anthem. So that brings to a close this presentation on selecting congregational hymns and choral anthems in accordance with the lectionary. I hope this will be for you a helpful resource, and it was a privilege and an honor to be asked to give these presentations at the Ordinariate Musicians Conference. God bless. Bye-bye.